What if Rimuru's omni-versal journey? By IJM_1001. What if the supreme deity Rimuru visited different universes? Rimuru has become Veldanava's successor, but unlike Veldanava, Rimuru, being bored, decides to go on an adventure to interact with other universes, becoming more powerful and having fun as he does so. Chapter 29, Side Story, Sorcerer vs. Curse. As Rimuru was traveling between dimensions to his next destination, he couldn't help but ask Sile, "So, where to now, my love?" Sile replied, "No spoilers, master." Rimuru pouted, "Not even a little hint?" Sile smiled, No spoilers, dear husband. You'll just have to wait patiently. We'll be arriving any moment now." Upon Sile saying so, Rimuru emerged from the portal in front of a planet resembling Earth. But something was off. It was Earth, but something was very different about it. Rimuru thought, "What is that weird energy I sense?" As Rimuru thought to himself, he began to inspect this strange Earth until his gaze fell on the source of this energy, which was Japan. As Rimuru's gaze arrived on Japan, he began to analyze the country. Upon doing so, images of the country's history began to flash through his mind in vivid detail. He thought to himself, "I see. So they monopolized this energy source just for their use and sealed it from the rest of the world. Cursed energy, who? And curses born from human emotions, with humans called sorcerers able to use this cursed energy. Intriguing, very intriguing." Rimuru began to grin devilishly as his analysis finished. Now, with his interest piqued, Rimuru decided to head down to Japan to further inspect things. But as Rimuru hovered just below the clouds overlooking Japan, all that awaited him was a country in complete ruin. The buildings were smashed, entire cities were wiped off the face of the map as if they were never there to begin with, and death permeated the air. That is all that Rimuru found of Japan. Rimuru, seeing all this death and destruction, couldn't help but sigh in disappointment at what had become of a once vibrant country. You only have yourselves to blame for this. Trying to play God with a power you don't fully understand. Nothing good has ever come from those whose main goal is absolute power. And here I was looking forward to getting some sushi or tempura. Damn it. Sile sighed, "How childish of you, dear." Rimuru countered, "What? You say that, but I was thinking we could go on a date." As Rimuru mentioned a date, Sile immediately flared with anger, stating, "Those fools dare deprive me of a date? I'll never forgive them." Rimuru snickered hearing this as he thought to himself, it can be so easy to stir her up. Suddenly, a massive explosion was heard. Rimuru turned his head only to witness a giant purple light that illuminated the surroundings, coming from the direction of the explosion. Being curious, Rimuru decided to go investigate as he made his way to the source. When he arrived, what awaited him were two individuals staring each other down. One had pure white hair with glowing blue eyes. The other had black hair with red eyes and strange black markings all over his body. The black-haired individual was missing an arm as a result of the previous explosion. As the two men continued to stare at each other, the white-haired individual boastfully stated to the black-haired man, "Seems you got the wrong idea here. So let's just get one thing straight. You're the challenger." The black-haired man seeing this could only grin as he thought to himself, "Cocky brat." Rimuru observing this found the white-haired man's attitude quite entertaining. He thought, what a spirited young man. Even when entering a death battle, he remained steadfast and even slightly cocky. "Sile, can you run an appraisal of the two and tell me what is going on?" Sile answered, "As you wish." Analysis complete. The white-haired individual is known as Satoru Gojo, and he is regarded as the strongest modern-day sorcerer. While the other individual is identified as Sukuna, the king of curses, and is known as the strongest cursed spirit in existence. Rimuru replied, "Ooh, I see. So that black-haired individual is Sukuna. I remember him when I analyzed their history, but didn't he look different?" Sile clarified, "Yes, he is currently inhabiting the body of another sorcerer by the name of Megumi Fushiguro." Rimuru nodded, "Aha, I see. Make sense. Just as Sile and Rimuru were having their chat, Gojo and Sukuna began their clash. Their fight was devastating. The infrastructure and parts of the city that remained were left badly destroyed. Gojo and Sukuna's battle lasted hours, both evenly matched in terms of hand-to-hand combat and their cursed energy output. All that divided them were their abilities, which Sukuna sorely outdid Gojo in that regard. Midway through their fight, while Gojo and Sukuna were having a clash of their domains, Rimuru was enthralled in their fight and decided to make a wager with Sile. Rimuru said, these two both kinda remind me of our world, Sile. Gojo the hero, and Sukuna the demon lord. Sile agreed, yes, I can certainly see the contrast. Rimuru continued, they're both clearly skilled. I wonder who will win. Say, I've got an idea. Why don't we have a little wager on the winner? Sile asked, interesting. And what would be the prize for winning? Rimuru thought, how about the winner picks when, where, and what we do on our next date? Sile smiled, agreed. So then, who do you choose? Rimuru answered, well, they're both certainly skilled. In terms of abilities, Sukuna is clearly the winner in that department. But in terms of skill, I would say it's Gojo. So I'll go with Gojo. Sile replied, very well. Sukuna it is then. Rimuru and Sile continued to watch the remainder of Gojo and Sukuna's fight with anticipation, now that they had stakes on the line. The fight was now nearing its end. Gojo had previously set up 2 orbs of cursed energy, one red and the other blue, and was now combining the two to create a hollow purple. When fired, the damage done was immense. Mahoraga was vaporized instantly, and Sukuna's left arm had been burnt off from blocking the attack. Gojo wasn't left unscathed either, as he had suffered burn marks all over his body, but he was victorious. Seeing this, Rimuru calmly stated, well, it appears that's my win. However, Sile's response back wasn't what Rimuru was expecting. I wouldn't be so sure of that. Rimuru then turned his attention back to the pair, only to find Gojo standing proud as he started monologuing to Sukuna. Rimuru, seeing this, could only sigh in disappointment as he said to Sile, what an idiot. He's won, yet he starts to monologue. Doesn't he realize this is going to be his downfall? Gojo, now done with his monologue, left Sukuna enough time to recover himself, just enough to deliver a world-cutting slash, leaving Gojo split in 2 and dying. Rimuru, seeing this, was left feeling disappointed at Gojo's stupidity. With a heavy sigh, he stopped time for this entire universe. It was then that Sile stepped forward as she mockingly stated, well, that's my win, I believe. Now I just need to decide what and where we're going to have our date. Rimuru turned to face Sile and in an instant swept Sile up off her feet, startling her as he did so. Rimuru just gazed into her eyes until he let out his notorious innocent smile, saying, yes, that's my loss. I eagerly await what you have planned, my love. Rimuru leaned into Sile to seductively whisper the last part, which turned Sile's face into a blushing mess. Rimuru then put Sile down before stating, if you don't mind, dear, I'm going to have a quick talk with those 2 gentlemen. Sile didn't respond and just simply nodded, still in a trance-like state from Rimuru's last interaction. Rimuru just smiled seeing Sile in that state before taking a small step off the building they were watching the fight from and entering into a free fall. While in free fall, Rimuru entered a sitting position with his legs crossed, continuing to descend until he stopped himself and began to hover over to Gojo and Sukuna. Once Rimuru was finally hovering over the pair, he began to rewind time to the exact moment when Gojo was about to start his monologue, and then made it so that Gojo and Sukuna could move in suspended time. As the pair came to their senses, they began to look around to see the world looked like shades of white and grey. They were left flabbergasted at the sight before them. Both of them had never witnessed such a phenomenon before. Time was stopped, the world itself was frozen in place, but somehow they could move. The two eyed each other, wondering if it was the other's doing, but suddenly an unfamiliar voice spoke to them. You can stop gazing at each other. It wasn't one of your doings. It was me. The two looked up only to see Rimuru hovering in a sitting position with his head resting against his hand in a very nonchalant manner, looking down at the pair. Sukuna was the first to ask, "And who are you supposed to be?" Rimuru introduced himself, "My name is Rimuru." "Rimuru Tempest." Gojo demanded, "What do you want, and what have you done to our world?" Rimuru assured them, "Worry not, Gojo, this world is perfectly fine. I've just stopped time for a moment to have a little chat with you too." Gojo gasped, "Stop time? So what are you, like a god or something?" Rimuru smiled, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am a god, as well as many other things." Sukuna sneered, "HMPH, a god you say? We'll see about that." Sukuna had been praised as a god himself in the past, so to him, Rimuru's words seemed as fake as they come. In order to prove his theory, he launched a world-splitting slash at Rimuru. But to his and Gojo's surprise, Rimuru, while still sitting like nothing bothered him, caught Sukuna's attack in between his fingers. Rimuru looked down, unfazed, as he stated to the pair, "So your attacks create a distortion in space. Impressive for a mere mortal such as yourself, but against me." Rimuru, while talking, casually flicked Sukuna's attack away before continuing, "It's utterly useless." The pair were left utterly bewildered at the casual display of power before them. Rimuru just nonchalantly caught a distortion of space in between his fingers and then flicked it away like someone flicking away a piece of paper or an ant. Rimuru added, "You're free to continue all the attacks you want, but I'll say this now, even if your entire universe teamed up to attack me at once, it would be utterly useless." The pair just continued to stare at Rimuru, unsure of what their next move should be, until Rimuru's words broke them out of their state. "If you're both done, I'll make my offer now." The pair both had the same thought upon hearing Rimuru's words, "Offer." Gojo was the first to voice his thoughts, "Offer? What offer?" Rimuru explained, "Well, I have seen into both your futures, and it appears you're both not needed in this universe anymore. So my offer is this, both of you come with me and serve me from now on. It would be such a waste to see two talents go to waste, so why not come back to my universe where you can be granted more power than you've ever had before, and live a life where you are free to decide what you like." The pair were left speechless. This offer entailed a lot for them, after all. But one thing was nagging at them after hearing Rimuru's offer, and surprisingly, it was Sukuna who asked this time, "You said we aren't needed in this universe anymore and that you've seen into our futures. What does that entail?" Rimuru stated simply, "Simple. You both die today." The pair were both shocked by this revelation as they both blurted out, "What?" Gojo asked this time, "What do you mean we both die?" "How?" Rimuru answered, "Here, I'll show you." Suddenly, images of the pair's futures flashed in their minds up until the point of their death. After coming back to their senses, the reality dawned on the pair after seeing their futures play out in their minds. After a minute of mulling over their future plans, Gojo asked, "I have some questions." Rimuru replied, "Go right ahead, ask away." Gojo inquired, "Well, for starters, what is your world like?" Rimuru described, "Very much different from this one. All manner of creatures and various races inhabit my universe. From dragons, to demons and demon lords, to humans and heroes, elves, spirits, and beastmen, even the gods themselves, and those are just to name a few. And unlike your world, magic is a very real thing there. Some magic is so powerful it could wipe out entire galaxies or universes." Gojo and Sukuna were left slightly apprehensive after hearing the prospect of magic so powerful it could wipe out entire universes. But nonetheless, Gojo pressed on with his questions, asking, "Okay, as terrifying as that thought is, you asked us to serve you. What would that entail? Would we be slaves to you?" Rimuru laughed, "Ahaha, no. When I say serve, it's more of a formality. You both would be free to pursue your own interests, just as long as it doesn't involve slaughtering innocents or harming my people, then I don't see a problem with it. But there may be times I call upon you, and my expectation is that you will answer my call." Gojo nodded, "Okay. Well then, I don't see any issue with this arrangement." Sukuna added, I also agree to your terms, but what will happen here if we just suddenly vanished? Rimuru assured them, not to worry. I will leave clones of you two behind with copies of your egos inhabiting them. So to onlookers, you two will still be here and act the same up until your deaths. After all, your deaths are needed to grow certain individuals here. The pair both nodded in satisfaction to Rimuru's words. Rimuru announced, all right, since you're both ready, let's begin your reincarnations. Gojo and Sukuna were about to voice their opinions after hearing reincarnation come out of Rimuru's mouth, but before they could, Rimuru took their souls and sent them flying back to the cardinal world for the voice of the world to deal with. In later years to come, Gojo would go on to awaken as a true hero, and Sukuna would go on to awaken as a true demon lord. Rimuru, now presented with the two lifeless bodies of Sukuna and Gojo, created pseudo-souls to inhabit the bodies, complete replicas of Gojo's and Sukuna's souls, so events would continue to play out as they should. After his work was done, Rimuru returned to Sile's side. Upon Rimuru's return, Sile asked, was that wise of you? Rimuru smiled, wise? Probably not. But hey, I'm curious to see where their futures go back in our world. Plus, I got myself two more capable subordinates. Sile then turned and opened a portal so they could continue on their journey. But before they did, Rimuru clicked his fingers to resume the flow of time back to this universe, and then turned and entered the gate with Sile. Chapter 30, Solo Leveling. As Rimuru and Sile were continuing their journey crossing dimensions, realms, and universes, Rimuru tried to ask Sile, so, what's this next place we're heading to like, Sile? Any spoilers this time? Sile answered, this time, I'll allow it. This universe we're traveling to is peculiar. 7 beings referred to as the absolute beings are the gods of that multiverse, with each of them governing over a separate universe they created. Rimuru noted, hey, so it's a multiverse we're traveling to, and you say that 7 gods each govern an individual universe. Sile continued, yes, that is correct, but there's more. This particular universe we're traveling to was governed by one of these absolute beings, until one day their own creation rose up against their god and killed him. Rimuru asked, they killed him, huh? This wouldn't happen to be a situation like Veldanava, now would it? Sile explained, no, far from it. The absolute beings grew bored in their long lives, and in their boredom, decided to pit their creations against one another in a never-ending war. One of these absolute beings created angels, referred to as the brilliant fragments of light, and pitted them against the monarchs, who are the incarnations of destruction and disasters. However, the angels, growing tired of the war, pleaded with their god to end the war. But they soon discovered that their creator never wanted their war to end, so they came to a decision to rebel and killed their creator to end the war. Rimuru mused, I see. Well, I certainly don't blame them. I probably would have done the same thing in their shoes. So, did their actions end the war? Sile replied, unfortunately not. The angels still have the monarchs to deal with, and their battle has continued to rage on. The monarch's sole purpose, after all, is to spread death and destruction. Rimuru commented, well, that certainly is a miserable existence. Reminds me of a certain dragon from back during the war. Sile added, yes, the monarchs can certainly be compared to that evil dragon, and not just metaphorically. Rimuru asked, really? So they're that strong? Sile clarified, individually, no. But together, the monarchs can rival an awakened demon lord, with each monarch possessing not just power, but armies that number in the millions. Rimuru grew a devilish smirk before continuing to say, I see. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Sile announced, we should be arriving momentarily, dear. Moments after Sile said so, Rimuru and Sile arrived at their designated destination. When they arrived, they were overlooking a planet that resembled the Earth of this universe. Rimuru, not wasting any time, closed his eyes and began to analyze this world, from its history all the way up to current events. As Rimuru was analyzing this world's history, he began murmuring to himself, gates, other dimensions, hunters, the monarch's invasion plan. I see. And the shadow monarch. Rimuru, after finishing his analysis of this world, opened his eyes and began by saying to Sile, "It's very chaotic here, isn't it?" Sile agreed. "I can smell the blood even from here." Rimuru remarked, "Indeed. And the magic power emanating from Earth right now is something else. They're lucky this planet hasn't ruptured in on itself." Sile just nodded in agreement. However, suddenly, Rimuru's senses kicked in as he felt and heard the sounds of weapons clashing from two immensely powerful beings coming from the direction of Korea. Their clash was incredibly destructive and wide-ranging, with Antares able to transform into a dragon with a size that could rival even the true dragons, and Sung Jin Woo with his never-ending undead army, quick battle wits, and blitzing speed to boot. As Rimuru and Sile watched this impressive battle from orbit, Rimuru couldn't help but compliment the tenacity of Sung Jin Woo's efforts. "That Shadow Monarch is impressive. He's tenacious, and his willpower alone makes him quite remarkable, I must say." Sile agreed, "Yes, I agree. And he has potential for further evolution." Rimuru added, "Yes, I sense it too. His soul is incredibly potent. You know, if he wasn't already the Shadow Monarch of this universe, I bet he would be able to reincarnate into our universe on his own if he ever died." Sile noted, "Yes, it certainly could have been possible." Rimuru and Sile continued to watch Sung Jin Woo and Antares' battle unfold, which lasted nearly an hour. The battle was intense and destructive but ultimately ended when Sung Jin Woo, in a last-ditch effort, charged at Antares with his generals. They swung and stabbed with all their might to end the fight. However, Antares still remained only slightly damaged. But this was only a distraction. In fact, the entire fight had been one big distraction. Because suddenly, the army of angels arrived at the battlefield, and in a swift motion, the leaders of the angels killed Antares in a matter of seconds. Seeing all this, Rimuru couldn't help but feel admiration for Sung Jin Woo's plan. "Aha, did you see that? So he was merely a distraction this entire time. I must say, it was a very well thought out plan to use himself as bait to buy time for the angels to arrive." Sile replied, "Yes, it certainly was. Definitely not something any ordinary person could think up." Rimuru smiled, agreed. "His intellect is quite something. It's a pity. I would have chosen to bring him back with us if he wasn't so needed in this multiverse." Sile sighed, "Dear, you can't just bring people that catch your attention back with us." Rimuru argued, "Who? I don't see any problem with it, just as long as they are not paramount to their universe, there shouldn't be any problem. Besides, I already said I'm not gonna do that with him." After their brief interaction, Rimuru and Sile turned their attention back to Sung Jin Woo and the leaders of the angels making a deal. After the angels thanked Sung Jin Woo for his efforts and told him that if they could do anything for him, they would, Sung himself asked the angels if they could use the cup of reincarnation again. The cup was a magical item created by the Absolute Being to turn back time by 10 years. However, the cup wasn't almighty. It could only be used a limited amount of times, and the angels were on their last usage. Furthermore, the cup didn't affect higher beings like the monarchs or angels, meaning that although the monarchs that, regardless, even after the angels warned Sung Jin Woo of all of this, he still persisted, stating, "Too many people have died in this war." He declared that he would fight the monarchs and their armies in the dimensional gap where the monarchs reside, before they could send their forces to Earth. So, the angels, keeping to their word to help Sung Jin Woo, agreed to his proposition and were going to use the cup of reincarnation one last time. However, suddenly, an unfamiliar voice spoke to them, stating, "I admire your spirit, Sung. So allow me to help." Everyone looked around to find the source of this voice, until all of a sudden, a bright golden light appeared in the sky with spiritual balls of light fluttering about, with Rimuru at the center. Rimuru descended like a true deity, his presence surprising everyone. The leader of the angels was the first to ask, "Who are you?" Rimuru, in his cheerful tone, answered, "My name is Rimuru Tempest. I am just a passerby who happened to witness the spirit of this young man and felt like giving him my assistance." Sung asked, "Passerby? What do you mean by assistance?" Rimuru replied, I witnessed your fight with Antares, and I gotta say, your spirit is quite remarkable. Because of that, I felt like helping you. Sung questioned, okay, but how can you help me? Rimuru smiled, simple. I will rewind time for you so you can keep that last use of the cup of reincarnation, and I will come with you to fight the monarchs. Sung hesitated, wait, come with me and rewind time? No offense, sir, but are you sure you know what you're saying? The angel leader gasped, impossible. I've never heard of anyone other than the absolute being who can control time. Rimuru laughed, ahaha, worry not. Truth is, rewinding time is no problem for me. And as for coming with you to fight the monarchs, I'm stronger than I look. Plus, I won't. In order to prove his words, Rimuru moved so fast right up to Sung that no one could perceive him. It just looked like Rimuru suddenly appeared in front of Sung, which startled everyone. Seeing everyone's startled expressions, Rimuru tried to ease their tension by smiling friendly and putting his hand out for Sung to shake while asking, so, how about it? Sung was pessimistic at first. A being he had never met before just showed up out of nowhere, stating he could manipulate time like it was nothing. But after some careful consideration, and being swayed by this person's friendly, warm smile, he decided to accept the offer and shook Rimuru's hand. Rimuru announced, all right. Shall I begin then? Sung gave a nod of approval, and so with that confirmation, Rimuru began the rewind of time. Rimuru used the same rules the cup of reincarnation follows, so as to not accidentally erase Sung's or the angel's memories. With Rimuru's activation of Time Leap, Sung now began traveling back through time, his vision becoming completely black all around from the effect of traveling into the past. However, as he traveled back, he heard Rimuru's voice echo in his mind, stating, after you awaken and are ready, come find me. I'll be waiting for you. Chapter 31, A Second Chance. When Sung awoke after being transported 10 years into the past, he found himself in a very familiar setting as he began thinking to himself, this is my old room. As Jin Woo was deep in thought, a familiar little voice entered into his room. Big brother, get up. Breakfast is ready. Jin Woo was shocked seeing his little sister, who was now the little age of 6, peep into his room. His only thought was, she is so little. Jin Woo quickly shook himself out of these thoughts as he replied, yeah okay, I'm coming. However, before going to eat breakfast with his family, Jin Woo checked in the mirror to see that he himself had turned back into his 12-year-old self. After this startling revelation, Jin Woo made his way to the dining room, only to witness a miracle that he had once thought impossible. His mother was young and healthy, making breakfast for everyone. And most surprising of all was his father, who had previously died in front of Jin Woo, alive and well as he read the paper and ate breakfast with his family. Seeing his family alive and well, living together again, Jin Woo was overcome by emotions as tears began streaming from his eyes. Seeing this, however, Jin Woo's family was surprised to see him crying. His mother asked, Jin Woo, is everything all right? What's wrong? To which Jin Woo simply replied as he wiped his tears away and smiled at his family, nothing. Nothing at all. I think I just had a bad dream. Jin Woo's family just smiled and began to sit down to enjoy breakfast together. But little did any of them know, Jin Woo's father, Sung Illinois Hwan, was also in the same boat as Jin Woo. As a vessel for one of the rulers, he retained all his memories of the previous events. Seeing his family again and his son crying, he began to weep uncontrollably as he hid his face behind the newspaper he was reading. Meanwhile, while the Sung family was reuniting and enjoying themselves, a familiar pair watched this interaction from afar. Rimuru said, I'm happy for him. Every hero needs something to fight for. Sile replied, indeed. Almost makes me want to start a family of our own. Hearing Sile's words, Rimuru flinched in fear as he slowly turned to her, only to see Sile smiling innocently. However, Rimuru knew better. Behind that innocent smile of Sile's was a she-devil in disguise, ready to pounce at a moment's notice. Realizing the dilemma he was in, Rimuru started to sweat profusely as he nervously answered, aha, yeah. It would be nice, but... As soon as Rimuru said but, Sile only had to slightly tilt her head and repeat, but, for Rimuru to realize Sile was becoming more serious. This only added to Rimuru's stress levels. But after taking a deep breath to calm himself, Rimuru looked into Sile's eyes as he began to state, but you're right. It would be nice to start a family with you. But we need to be careful. This isn't something we can just do on a whim, and you know this. If we're not careful, we could accidentally unleash a more powerful Evage that could destroy all of creation. And if that happens, I'll be forced to seal them away, or worse, kill them. It would destroy me if I had to do that to my own child. After hearing Rimuru's thoughts, Sile realized just how much this decision had been weighing on her beloved's shoulders. Sile then embraced Rimuru as she said, "Okay, I understand. But just know, if it is our child and we are the ones raising them, they would turn out perfectly fine. And I will be with you every step of the way, so there is no reason to take this burden on yourself." Rimuru reciprocated the embrace as he spoke, "You're probably right. Okay, how about when we're finished with our journey, we sit down and seriously talk about this?" Sile smiled, "Deal." Rimuru and Sile continued to embrace for a moment before Rimuru stated, "Okay, let's go. We're going to need to find somewhere to stay for a while." Sile agreed, and so Rimuru and Sile walked off into the sunrise as they discussed ideas of where they could make a home for a while. For the next 2 years, Jin Woo spent his days enjoying his peaceful life. His only thought was, this is okay, right? Just a little longer. Jin Woo was spending his days at school with his friends and enjoying this second chance with his family as much as he could. Meanwhile, Rimuru and Sile had found themselves a quiet apartment to stay in. They spent their days going on dates, making love, having fun, and generally living life without a care in the world, but always making sure they would check up on Jin Woo to see how he was doing. Money was never an issue, being that Rimuru and Sile could just create money whenever they needed it or take it from some rich snob. However, this peaceful life was never meant to be a permanent thing, and Jin Woo knew this. As much as he wanted it to be, he still had a very important battle to face. So, Jin Woo wrote a note for his family saying, "I have something I need to do, but I will be back." With the note written, Jin Woo made his way to the park next to his house, only to see Rimuru waiting for him with a female who had the same colored hair as Rimuru. Seeing Rimuru, Jin Woo approached him. Jin Woo's only reply was, "Yeah." Jin Woo was feeling complex. He didn't want to leave his family, but he knew that he had to for his world's sake. Not missing a beat, Jin Woo looked at Sile with an inquisitive look. Rimuru stated, "Oh right, this is your first time officially meeting. This is Sile, my wife." Jin Woo was surprised to hear this, replying, "Your wife? You're actually bringing your wife to a war." Rimuru laughed, "Ahaha, worry not. She is perfectly fine. My wife is only second to me in terms of power." Jin Woo countered, "Fine, but if anything happens to her, just know it's on you." Rimuru smiled, "Ahaha, don't worry. I will always take responsibility when it comes to that." "Alright, with that out of the way, let's go then." So are you keeping that appearance?" Jin Woo still had the appearance of a young boy around the age of 14. Ignoring Rimuru's question, Jin Woo quickly changed his appearance to that of his 24-year-old self, before opening a portal to the dimensional gap where the monarchs reside. When the group arrived in the dimensional gap, they landed in the Shadow Monarch's territory, where the former Shadow Monarch once ruled. Jin Woo wasn't wasting any time as he summoned forth his army while stating, "Arise. Now, the hunt begins." Chapter 32, Tempest Forces. Jin Woo shattered the silence as he summoned his shadow army, and a sea of shadow soldiers came forth, numbering in the millions. Although Jin Woo lost quite a large portion of his army due to the time travel, he still had the original army the previous Shadow Monarch left behind, along with the army he himself gathered from the gates. Rimuru was impressed seeing Jin Woo's shadow army, but not wanting to be outdone, Rimuru stated, "Impressive. Being able to summon forth so many soldiers is quite the feat. Well then, you've shown yours, now it's time to show you mine." Jinwoo was a little confused about what Rimuru meant. As far as he knew, only Rimuru and Sile would be fighting with him. He wasn't expecting anyone else. However, Rimuru, not wasting any time, summoned forth a gigantic portal that dwarfed any gate Jinwoo had ever seen before. While Jinwoo was left surprised by the sheer size of the gate Rimuru had summoned, slowly but surely, Tempest's full forces started appearing in all their glory. Numbering close to 2 million, Rimuru over these past 5,000 years had not only built the cardinal world up into a technologically advanced society, but had also garnered an army so big and powerful that nothing could stand against it. Not only was the size of the army impressive, but Rimuru, taking a note out of Michael's book, had been gathering more awakened beings under him than anyone else. The army was diverse, ranging from orcs, Kijin, dragonutes, and beastmen, to various Majin, warrior elves, humans, giants, dire wolves, hobgoblins, dragons, dragon kings, dryads, demons, spirits, and insectars. Any race you could think of, they were present. Because of the stability Rimuru had brought to the cardinal world, these various races had thrived and more than repopulated their species. Jinwoo was left speechless at the size of Rimuru's army. But not only that, he could sense their power too. Even the lowest ranked soldiers were comparable to a rank hunter from his world, and he wasn't wrong. All the soldiers donned legendary class gear. On top of all that, even the lowest ranked soldiers were all rank C to B rank adventurers in the cardinal world. Just being a captain of a squad meant you were an A to S rank adventurer, and being a colonel meant you were a demon lord seed. Those who awakened had been to see Rimuru himself in a special ritual the Tempest inhabitants now called the Baptism of Souls, after which they were automatically awarded the rank of general or lieutenant and given mythical grade gear. But second only to Rimuru, Rimuru's executives had complete control over the army. Only Rimuru himself had the authority to override a command from the executives. Still basking in the size and power of the army, Rimuru calmly stated, "Impressive, isn't it? It wasn't always like this. I remember when we numbered just close to 50,000, and now look at them." Jinwoo didn't respond and only continued to observe the various powers of Rimuru's army, until some familiar presences were felt. Suddenly appearing were Benimaru, Sue, Shun, Shuna, Diawlo, the Demonis Trio, Ronga, Apito, Zijin, Kumara, Gabiru, Geld, Gobta, Hakuru, and Adalman. The group bowed in reverence with Benimaru taking the lead as he spoke. "We have done as you asked, Lord Rimuru. You only need to give the word and it shall be done." Rimuru smiled. "Well done. Now come on, you guys, you know you don't need to bow to me. But I want to ask, Shuna, what are you doing here, my lovely?" Shuna donned her classic menacing smile as she stated, "Well, when I heard from Sir Diawlo and the Lady Demonesses that you were having a good old time traveling, I was curious." Rimuru began to sweat as he tried to come up with an answer for Shuna, but no matter how hard he tried, his only thought was, "Crap, I'm screwed." As Rimuru was having these thoughts, Shun slammed her Hercules edge into the ground as she said, "Shuna's right. It isn't fair Sile's the only one who gets to travel with you. What about us?" Rimuru then nervously started to say, "Shuna, Shun, my dears, I'm sorry. It was just a sudden idea, and you know that all I do now is sit in my castle. I was getting so bored up there. So, would you please forgive me?" Rimuru decided on one course of action to get him out of this. As he said the last part of his sentence, he gave the best puppy dog eyes he could muster. His plan, however, only half worked. While Shun was completely taken in, Shuna was reluctant as she stated, "You're going to have to try harder than that, sir." Rimuru pleaded, "I understand. Then how about I make it up to you, Shuna? We can go out on a date." Shuna flared a bit of her aura as she asked, "You mean it?" Rimuru nodded quickly, "Yes, absolutely." Shuna, now happy, retracted her aura as she gleefully stated, "Good." Rimuru let out a sigh of relief, thinking his problems were done, until another familiar voice rang out, "Rimuru-sama." Rimuru reluctantly tilted his head in the direction of the voice. It was Chloe. Chloe's bloodlust was showing as she walked toward Rimuru. Rimuru, seeing this, was nervously sweating as he turned to Benimaru to ask, "Why is Chloe here?" Benimaru explained, "Like all of us, she heard from Diawlo that you were traveling with Queen Sile. And when she heard that you called for us, she insisted that she would be coming too. There's no way we could deny her. It took everything we had just to restrain her from destroying the throne room after hearing from Diawlo that you were traveling without her." Rimuru, hearing this, could only mutter, "Diawlo." As he slowly turned to face a scared Diawlo, Rimuru, looking like a crazed demon, stared at him and stated, "Diawlo, this is all your fault." Diawlo began to sweat nervously, seeing his master looking at him with such anger. However, Diawlo was spared from Rimuru's wrath as Chloe appeared behind Rimuru, coldly stating, "Got any final words?" Hearing this, Rimuru nervously turned to face Chloe as he stuttered, "Chloe, my dear, it's good to see you." Rimuru was cut off as Chloe punched him in the cheek, sending him crashing into a boulder with his face embedding itself in the stone. While Rimuru was pulling his face out of the boulder, Jin Woo, who had been silently observing everything, began to think to himself, "Talk about woman troubles. But just who is this Rimuru really? Not only can he manipulate time and space, but he even possesses an army more powerful than mine. Not to mention these people in front of me now, they're just as strong as me. No, some of them are probably stronger." Some smacks later, after getting a lecture from Chloe and profusely apologizing, Rimuru finally quelled the fury of the angry Chloe. While she had still not forgiven him completely, Rimuru promised to make it up to her, which definitely helped the matter. That was what Chloe was now waiting for before she could fully forgive him. Now that the matter with Chloe was settled for the moment, Rimuru got back on track as he apologized, "Apologies for the delay, Jin Woo." Jin Woo replied, "On the contrary, it was quite the entertainment." Rimuru just laughed nervously, thinking about Chloe's reaction from before and having to deal with that later. But deciding that could wait, Rimuru got back on topic as he stated to everyone, "Right then, before we begin, everyone, this is Sung Jin Woo. He is a friend, and we will be aiding him in this fight. Our opponents are called the Monarchs, and each possesses armies numbering in the millions. So, Benimaru." Benimaru stepped forward, "Yes, my lord." Rimuru commanded, "I'm appointing you as the leader for this campaign. Strategize and come up with a plan. Don't be afraid to talk to Jin Woo soldiers, they may have some insight." Benimaru bowed, "Yes, very well, my lord. It shall be done." Rimuru announced, "Good. Everyone else, prepare your teams and yourselves for battle. We leave in 5 hours." Everyone in unison responded the same as they said, "As you wish, Rimuru-sama." With that, everyone left to complete their tasks. Shuna, Chloe, and Sile stayed by Rimuru's side, while everyone else teleported back to their core of the army to prepare for battle. Benimaru, on the other hand, immediately gathered his top subordinates and teleported them and himself over to Jin Woo's army, asking to talk to the highest-ranked soldiers. There, Benimaru and his men met with Belion, Igris, and Baru. The group then walked over to a tent that had been set up for them and began a strategy meeting. Meanwhile, a grand tent was erected for Rimuru. Inside, Rimuru lay comfortably on a bed couch fit for an emperor. All manner of expensive furniture, food, and drink could be seen inside. While Rimuru sat comfortably, surrounded by his beautiful wives and consorts, Diawlo was also present as he served everyone food and drinks. Jin Woo sat at a table opposite Rimuru, alone, with an annoyed and agitated expression evident on his face as he thought to himself, "Look at this guy." Rimuru, who had just been fed some strawberries and grapes by his wives, could sense the disgust Jin Woo was directing toward him. So, Rimuru got up and walked over to join Jin Woo at the table. As Rimuru sat opposite him, he asked, "What's wrong there, buddy? I could feel your anger from all the way over there." Jin Woo interrupted, "Didn't you say you were going to help me? How is any of this helping me?" Rimuru assured him, "Relax, my friend. Benimaru and your men are formulating a plan as we speak." Jin Woo interrupted Rimuru again, saying, "Don't tell me to relax, and we're not friends. I don't even know you, nor do I trust you. You just came in out of nowhere, offered to help, which I accepted only because you can manipulate time, but all we're doing is sitting around. Rimuru countered, okay, I get it. I get that you want this to be over quickly so you can go back to your family. But believe me, when it comes to war, Benimaru is the best strategist to have. Let him come up with a plan, and you'll be back to your family in no time. Jin Woo, after being seen through completely by Rimuru, calmed his agitated heart a little. After a moment of silence between the two, Jin Woo asked, "Why are you even helping me? If you wanted, you could have just gone back in time and helped the first Shadow Monarch destroy the other monarchs." Rimuru looked at him. "You're right, but I chose to help you. Truth is, when I look at you, I see a different version of myself." Jin Woo looked at Rimuru with a curious gaze as Rimuru took a more serious tone. "You know, I wasn't always like this, the way I am now. Truth is, I remember when I had nothing. In a world where strength is everything, I was the weakest, nothing more than a weak little slime monster. But through determination and some help from friends, I grew stronger. And like you, when my world faced devastation, I was the one who had to step up and save it." Jin Woo just stared at Rimuru. Feeling the conviction in Rimuru's words, Jin Woo sat silently and listened. Rimuru continued, "But unlike you, I had my friends to support me. And when I look at you, I see a glimpse of what I would look like if I had been all alone and had to deal with everything myself." Jin Woo just stared at Rimuru's hand for a moment, before reciprocating the handshake. "Very well then." Rimuru smiled, "All right then." Rimuru stood up to go back to his wives, but just before leaving, he quickly stated to Jin Woo, "Relax here for now if you want, or if you're still feeling agitated, you're more than welcome to join in with Benimaru for the planning." As Rimuru lay back down with his wives, Jin Woo decided to look around the army's camp before joining in on Benimaru's strategy meeting. After a few hours, Benimaru and everyone had formulated a plan of attack and were presenting it to Rimuru. Rimuru agreed, and with that, the go-ahead was given. Jin Woo and all of Rimuru's subordinates gathered their forces in preparation to march. The war was now beginning. Chapter 33, Beginning of the War. Moments before Rimuru summoned the Tempest forces, far off in a separate dimension, the monarchs were having a meeting about how to deal with the Shadow Monarch. All of them were surprised when they were revived. Every single one of them had previously died at the hands of Jin Woo, but now that they were alive again and together, they were determined to kill Jin Woo this time. All except Antares, the King of Dragons, the Monarch of Destruction, and the strongest of all the monarchs, could not help but find the situation amusing. Moments before the death of Antares, he had said, "I will be waiting for you in the eternal slumber." To which Jin Woo replied, "It won't be long. I will see you soon enough." Those were the last words Antares heard, and now that he was back alive, he could not help but find the whole situation amusing as he thought to himself, so this is what he meant. "Okay, Shadow Monarch, I will wait for our rematch." As Antares was in deep contemplation, a menacing smile crept onto his face as he thought about the upcoming rematch with Jin Woo, paying no mind to the conversation of the other monarchs. As Antares continued to imagine his upcoming rematch with Jin Woo, a small chuckle managed to escape from him. Hearing the laugh of Antares silenced the other monarchs. That is until Karacia, the monarch of plagues and the queen of insects, broke the silence as she asked, "Antares, what is so funny? Do you have a plan to deal with the Shadow Monarch?" However, Antares had not been listening until he heard his name called. So he casually turned to the group and asked, "Huh? What was that? I wasn't listening." Hearing this, the other monarchs all wore deadpan expressions, and Tarnak, the monarch of iron bodies and the king of monstrous humanoids, asked annoyedly, "Wait, so you mean to say that while the rest of us have been coming up with a plan, you haven't even been listening at all?" Antares then stood up as he stated, "I don't care what any of you plan to do. I am going to simply wait for the Shadow Monarch to come to me. You can all do whatever you want, I don't care. But I will say this now, if any of you get in my way, it will be the last thing you ever do." The words of Antares filled the other monarchs with dread. There was nothing any of them could do about this situation. Antares was the strongest of the monarchs, and now they had to face an opponent that they knew they stood no chance against without him. As the words of Antares continued to linger in the minds of the monarchs, he turned away from the group as he readied himself to depart back to his domain. That is until suddenly, a heavy pressure washed over the monarchs. The pressure was so great that the weaker monarchs were nearly forced to the ground. When the pressure finally subsided, most of the monarchs were left feeling completely terrified. Rakan, the monarch of fangs and the king of beasts, was the first to speak as he asked nervously, "What was that?" Silad, the monarch of frost and the king of snow folk, was next to speak, just as nervously as Rakan. Whatever that was, it wasn't the shadow monarch. However, shaking the monarchs out of this fear, Antares then stated, "Can't you all sense it? Hundreds, no, thousands of beings just as strong as us, some even surpassing us, have arrived. I don't know who or where they came from, but now I am even more interested." As Antares spoke, a menacing smile formed on his face, visible for all to see, before he left the monarchs and returned to his domain. Antares, being the strongest, always relished the thought of fighting powerful opponents. However, the other monarchs had very different expressions and feelings about this. The words of Antares cut through them like a hot knife through butter. The other monarchs were feeling terrified. The very thought of there being thousands of individuals just as strong as them struck fear deep into their souls, a feeling not even the angels or the shadow monarch had accomplished. To top it all off, now they had to face this new threat without their strongest member. As the true dread of what they were up against settled in, the monarchs formed a plan to the best of their abilities. The only thing they could come up with was to stick together and combine their forces. It was the only feasible option they had, after all. And so, with that decided, the monarchs departed back to their domains to prepare their armies to move. Back in the present, Rimuru and Jin Wu, along with their armies, were currently on the march toward the monarchs. Their original strategy was simple: divide and conquer. They wanted to face each monarch individually, and after their armies had been decimated, Jin Wu would resurrect them into his shadow soldiers. A simple strategy, yes, but effective. However, Rimuru, Sile, and Jin Wu had long sensed the monarchs congregating together, rendering their original plan useless. Even so, Rimuru, Sile, and Benimaru saw this as an absolute win as they formulated a new plan. Rimuru asked, "Are you sure this will work, Benimaru? You and everyone else will have to hold back quite a bit, but at the same time, it will need to be powerful enough to take out a few 100,000 of them." Benimaru replied, "Not to worry, Lord Rimuru. We only need to create an attack deadly enough to take out a large portion of the enemy forces, while at the same time leaving their souls and part of their bodies intact for Sir Jin Wu to do his thing. With all of us working together on this, I believe we can take out half of the enemy forces, which will be more than enough for Sir Jin Wu." The other executives all nodded in agreement to the plan of Benimaru, along with Jin Wu, who was also in agreement. Rimuru stated, "Very well then. I don't see any problem with this. You have my permission." With the final nod of agreement from Rimuru, their plan was set. The army of Rimuru, along with his executives, would all launch one big magical attack at the enemy forces to take out as many as they could. Then, before the enemy could regroup, Jin Wu would resurrect the fallen and have them begin fighting from behind enemy lines. While the enemy was preoccupied with the newly resurrected shadow soldiers, the army of Rimuru would attack from the front, while at the same time, Jin Wu would begin his assault with his army from the west, catching the remainder of the enemy forces in. With their plan set, the forces of Rimuru and Jin Wu continued to march onward toward the monarchs. It took them about a week, but once they arrived at the location of the monarchs, they were met with the sight of a gigantic canyon that stretched out for hundreds of miles in all directions. On the opposite side of the canyon stood the monarchs, and underneath them at the bottom of the canyon on their side stood the combined forces of the monarchs. A sea of various races, creatures, and monsters littered the floor, making it appear as if the very bottom of the canyon floor was alive and moving. Seeing the enemy in front of them, the forces of Rimuru began teleporting to the bottom of the canyon as they lined up and stood opposite the enemy. However, the monarchs were surprised to see the Tempest forces for the first time. Various high-level races stood opposing them, but what was more surprising was the fact that the Shadow Army was nowhere to be found. That is until Jin Wu stood opposite the monarchs as he and the monarchs began staring each other down, seeing who would make the first move. It was then, however, that the executives of Rimuru began showing up, standing next to Jin Wu. This startled the monarchs as they realized these people were the individuals Antares had mentioned, and from their count, these beings that surpassed them in strength outnumbered them. However, the biggest surprise was yet to be revealed. Appearing above Jin Wu and the executives, a luxurious, gold-framed red couch hovered above everything. On it sat Rimuru, with each of his wives snuggled in close to him. The sight of the nonchalance of Rimuru left the monarchs shocked as they all thought to themselves, "Who the hell is that? He must be the leader of this other army." As the monarchs continued to stare at Rimuru and his wives, contemplating who he was, all of a sudden, the rainbow-colored eyes of Rimuru locked onto the monarchs. Without warning, the monarchs all felt a deep pain in their chests as they grabbed themselves in agony. To them, it was as if their very souls shrieked in fear and tried to leave their bodies. Again, the monarchs all thought to themselves, "What the hell was that? Just one look from him caused this much pain in my chest. Just what the hell is this guy, to cause this much pain from a single glance?" While the monarchs were dealing with the pain they had just felt, Jin Wu looked at Benimaru, who was next to him, as he asked, "Well, shall we begin?" Hearing the words of Jin Wu, Benimaru could hardly contain his excitement as he replied, "Thought you would never ask." With that, Benimaru opened a thought communication with all the executives and high-ranking officers in the army as he stated, "Let us begin." Chapter 34, War of the Monarchs. On the command of Benimaru, the Tempest forces sprung into action. Every member began charging a basic fireball attack. While the size of the fireball generated from each individual varied, what truly mattered was the scale. 2 million troops, all in unison, launching the biggest fireball they could muster. When the time came and everyone was ready, Benimaru issued his command as he yelled, "Fire!" With that, an ocean of fireballs launched toward the enemy, completely blackening out the sky upon doing so, until only the light of the fireballs could be seen. However, the monarchs, seeing this plan their enemy had concocted, were not fazed at all. The monarchs each opened 2 portals in order to redirect the attack of the enemy back at them. But to their surprise, as the monarchs opened their portals, they suddenly felt their portals closing. No matter how hard they tried to stop this or reopen another portal, it was pointless. As realism set in, the monarchs each shared a quick, worried look with one another before they turned back to the battlefield just in time to witness the onslaught of fireballs making impact. The devastation caused by the onslaught of the Tempest forces was unimaginable, like an ocean of fire eviscerating everything in its path, creating a shockwave that could be felt throughout the entire dimension. With the dust and rubble finally settling down a bit, the monarchs were left terrified and angry at the sight that lay before them. Half their forces were dead and some were brutally injured. Those who could not escape the attack were either instantly vaporized or burned to death, leaving an ashy sculpture where they died. However, leaving the monarchs no time to reorganize the remainder of their armies, Benimaru gave a nod to Jin Wu. Seeing this, Jin Wu did not waste any time as he said, "Arise." On the command of Jin Wu, the dead of the enemy came back to life as shadow soldiers and immediately began attacking what was once their brethren just a second ago. The sudden onslaught from Jin Wu caught the enemy completely off guard. They had not even had time to recover from the previous onslaught, and now their dead comrades had risen back to life and were overrunning them. As the armies of the monarchs struggled to deal with the newly resurrected shadow soldiers, Benimaru gave his order to the Tempest forces, telling them to begin their assault. The Tempest forces then began their frontal assault as they roared into the battlefield like a disastrous tidal wave. Meanwhile, as the Tempest army began their frontal assault, Jin Wu summoned forth his shadow army, with all of the commander level or higher monsters appearing next to their master. It was then that as the battle continued to rage on, the monarchs watched on in a sense of bewilderment. They had not even had time to give orders, and now their armies were being pressed on all sides in a one-sided massacre, like lambs for the slaughter. Suddenly, an eerie laugh was heard from behind the monarchs, catching them off guard. Truly a lovely sensation, isn't it? As the monarchs locked eyes with this being, this unknown individual continued to speak in a frightening tone, the desperate sounds of those dying on the battlefield, the cries of help from those on death's door. I just love the smell of fear." This being before the monarch sent shivers down their spines. His words, filled with a sense of ecstasy, struck fear deep down into their hearts. The monarchs remained silent, unable to even utter a word out of fear. Until finally, Tarnak mustered up the courage to speak. "Who the hell even are you people?" Hearing this question, the being regained his composure as he stated, "Oh my, where are my manners? My name is Diawlo, Lord Rimuru's personal butler and an executive in the Tempest army. Lord Rimuru has assigned me the pleasurable task of disposing of the trash." The monarchs were all furious at being referred to as trash. However, they all had the same thought: who the hell is Lord Rimuru and what is the Tempest army? How come I've never heard of them before, and where did they come from? As the thoughts of the monarchs were swirling for answers, Diawlo broke their train of thought as he arrogantly asked, "Well, shall we get started? I wouldn't want to keep my lord waiting." Hearing this, Silid, the Frost monarch, asked back, "You intend to take us all on by yourself? Your arrogance will be your end." However, to the surprise of the monarchs, Diawlo simply smirked as he stated, "Who said I was alone?" Suddenly, Benimaru, Zijin, and Jin Wu appeared next to Diawlo. With the sudden appearance of Jin Wu, Silid erupted in fury as he yelled, "Shadow Monarch, you dare turn against us and now you hide behind these people. Coward, afraid of a fair fight." Silid expected his words to anger Jin Wu. However, Jin Wu remained calm as he put his index finger in front of his lips and stated in a soft tone, "Dead men don't speak. Now then." In that next instant, a knife protruded through the neck of Yogimant, the monarch of transfiguration. It was Jin Wu. He had activated his stealth skill and stabbed Yogimant through the back of his neck, instantly killing him in the process. The other monarchs looked over in disbelief, shocked by the shadow monarch killing a fellow monarch instantly. Seeing the frightened faces of the other monarchs, Jin Wu retracted his knife from the neck of Yogimant, letting his cold, lifeless body fall to the ground, before coldly stating, "One down, 4 to go." Driven by blind fear and anger, the remaining monarchs jumped at Jin Wu in a combined attack, that is until they were suddenly stopped. Benimaru, Diawlo, and Zijin each blocked an attack from one of the monarchs, and with that, their fights were underway. The matchups were as follows: Benimaru vs Rakan, the king of beasts; Diawlo vs Silid, the monarch of frost; Zijin vs Karatia, the queen of insects; and lastly, Jin Wu vs Rakan vs Benimaru. The beast instincts of Rakan were in overdrive, screaming at him that this person was dangerous, so not wasting any time, Rakan transformed into his beast form. The beast form of Rakan allows him to transform into a giant werewolf standing nearly 9 feet tall, with large, sharp claws made of a metal alloy. Rakan then launched himself at Benimaru at breakneck speed as he aimed to remove the head of Benimaru from his body as quickly as possible. But to the disappointment of Rakan, Benimaru had been following the movements of Rakan with ease and effortlessly blocked his attack using his katana, Crimson Lotus. Seeing that his move failed, Rakan decided that he needed more speed, so he started using large boulders as a sort of springboard as he launched himself in all directions. He surrounded Benimaru, creating afterimages in his place. Benimaru remained perfectly still, and Rakan mistakenly took this as a sign of giving up, as he arrogantly stated, "What's wrong? Don't know which one is the real me? This is what you get for stupidly challenging me, Rakan, king of the beasts." However, to the surprise of Rakan, Benimaru perfectly turned to face him as he bounced around, making it seem like Rakan was moving in slow motion. Benimaru dismissively stated, "So, is the puppy finished bouncing around?" Rakan gritted his teeth in anger at the insult from Benimaru. So, mustering all the speed he could, Rakan hurled himself the fastest he had ever gone before at Benimaru, hoping to pierce his chest. However, this is exactly what Benimaru had been anticipating, and in an instant, Benimaru enveloped his blade in black flame, taking a battle stance as he did so and uttering, "Haze of the Black Dragon." In the next instant, Benimaru delivered a precise strike, so fast that it was as if he cut through the air itself. The strike was completely inconceivable to the eyes of Rakan, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what Benimaru had done. Suddenly, however, in the next instant, the upper body of Rakan began separating from his lower half, until all of a sudden, a black flame tornado protruded from where he was cut, enveloping Rakan in the process and reducing him to nothing. With that, Benimaru had easily won his duel with the Beast Monarch. Zijin vs. Karacia. The fight of Zijin went as expected, a one-sided massacre. Karacia, being the queen of insects, mistakenly thought that picking Zijin as her opponent would make her the automatic victor, as she thought that she would be able to control Zijin and add him to her forces. So without a thought, Karacia activated her skill, Queen's Authority, which allows her to control insect types, in order to manipulate Zijin. Upon activation of her skill, Karacia began smooth-talking Zijin as she flew around him, whispering seductively in his ear as she did so. "Why are you fighting your queen, my child? You should stop this and return to your mother's side. Together we could be unstoppable. I know you want to." Zijin coldly responded, "I could never be affected by such a trivial thing, and besides..." In the midst of Zijin speaking, he activated his ultimate skill, Mephisto, Lord of Fantasy, entrapping Karacia in an illusionary world where Zijin has full control over every aspect. Karacia was taken aback as she looked around, not understanding what was going on. Until in the next moment, a sight which would haunt her even in the afterlife revealed itself to her. A mountain of bodies appeared. Karacia could not hide her fear of Zijin in that moment as she stared up at him sitting upon his throne of the dead, looking almost bored as he stared down at her. Zijin then continued to say, "I am the king of insectars, and the title of queen doesn't belong to you." Karacia was about to respond, but in that instant, invisible blades reduced her to dust. Diawolo vs. Sillad. The fight of Diawolo with Sillad was like watching a child fight an adult. Diawolo simply played with Sillad the whole time, never taking the fight seriously. On the other hand, Sillad launched powerful ice magic continuously at Diawolo, eventually getting to the point where Sillad had to activate his trump card, Ice Age. It was a spell that turns everything it comes into contact with to ice. However, to the surprise of Sillad, Diawolo remained completely unharmed. Diawolo had coated himself in a thick layer of his aura, which shielded him from the spell. Diawolo then slowly began to walk towards Sillad, his hands behind his back as he mockingly stated, "It appears this is the best you have to offer. How disappointing. And here I thought you monarchs might prove somewhat of a challenge." Diawolo then disappeared from the sight of Sillad, only to then suddenly reappear behind him as he continued to mockingly state, "But it appears I was wrong." Diawolo then quickly grabbed Sillad by the back of his neck, lifting him up in the process, as he then proceeded to remove the body parts of Sillad one by one, using his claws to do so. Sillad screamed in agony as each of his ligaments was sliced off his body. The slices from Diawolo were imbued with the slightest traces of turn null, which was preventing Sillad from regenerating. Seeing Sillad flail around in utter despair brought Diawolo to a sense of ecstasy as he struggled to contain his amusement. A menacing smile crept onto the face of Diawolo as he continued to torture Sillad. Until finally, after moments of torture, which for Sillad felt like an eternity, Diawolo finally ended it by removing the head of Sillad from what was left of his body, reducing him to dust in the process. Jin Wu vs. Tarnak. Tarnak was an opponent that Jin Wu knew he could not take lightly. Unlike the other monarchs here, Tarnak was cold and calculative, and on top of that, he possessed the power to transform himself into a humanoid monster with skin as tough as steel. But nonetheless, Jin Wu knew these were all things he could overcome, considering he had already killed Tarnak before. Tarnak, on the other hand, already knew he could not win against the new Shadow Monarch, but no matter what, he had to face him now. There was no chance of escaping, and he still had his pride as a monarch to consider. But he knew facing the Shadow Monarch alone, away from his troops, was his best bet, and he did have a card to play in a situation like this. Tarnak opened a gate, and out stepped three massive, humanoid, golem-like monsters. These three monsters were elites among the ranks of Tarnak, which he had kept hidden away from the battlefield just for situations such as this. Tarnak then transformed into his monster form as he asked in his deep, monstrous voice, "You didn't think it was going to be that easy now, did you?" However, Jin Wu remained perfectly calm, almost as if he was expecting this. Jin Wu then calmly uttered, "Arise." Suddenly, Belion, Baru, and Igris appeared next to their king, with Jin Woo mockingly saying, "You didn't think it was going to be that easy now, did you?" Tarnak gritted his teeth at the words of Jin Woo, but just as he was about to motion his soldiers to attack, Jin Woo beat him to the punch. Igris, Baru, and Belion rushed forward, each of them instantly killing the monsters summoned by Tarnak. What followed after that was a one-sided fight as Jin Woo and his shadow elites teamed up on Tarnak. It eventually ended when Jin Woo managed to finally break through the steel body of Tarnak, splitting him in half using his daggers. Meanwhile, as the battle was coming to an end and Benimaru, Jin Woo, Diawlo, and Zijin finished their fights with the monarchs, Rimuru and his wives sat ever so comfortably, floating above the various battlegrounds as they watched from their seats. The group cuddled together as they watched the battles coming to their end, with Rimuru remarking, "Looks like that is victory for us." Although this battle was quick, it will serve to make for good experience for the new recruits. Chloe added, "Yes, we can expect today's events will benefit those just experiencing real battle today for the first time, for sure." Shun stated, "Agreed." Although everyone in the Tempest military is trained in the dungeon, when you are killed or do the killing in there, no matter what, they are resurrected and returned to perfect health. Shuna said, "Yes, and today is far different from their usual training in the dungeon. I think we can expect good things from today's battles." Rimuru then turned his attention back to Jin Woo, who was getting close to wrapping up his fight with Tarnak. As Rimuru continued to watch the fight of Jin Woo, a small smirk escaped his face as he thought to himself, "It's nearly time." With the monarchs defeated and their armies laid bare, the first part of the war was over and was an overwhelming victory for the side of Rimuru and Jin Woo. But this wasn't the end of the war, not by a long shot. Jin Woo still had one final hurdle to cross, and that was Antares, the first and strongest of all the monarchs. But knowing what needed to be done, Jin Woo did not waste any time as he muttered his classic line, "Arise," adding the slain troops from the armies of the monarchs to his new shadow army. Now armed with the addition of the combined forces of the monarchs, Jin Woo mentally prepared himself to face Antares, thinking to himself, "Just wait, Antares. I'm coming for our rematch."